Hello, gang. Tattooed Biker back here with you. And I know it's been a while, and I do apologize. Apparently, pneumonia in both lungs at my age can get pretty serious. And I'm sorry that my voice still isn't quite 100%, but you see, I've got strange encounters and reports that have been piling up. And besides, I've missed you guys. So tonight I've got 3 strange and compelling true stories about strange encounters, bizarre reports of unidentified creatures that I want to share with you. But before we jump in, do me a favor. Smack the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and then grab your boots and let's ride to Cryptid Country. Dear Biker, during the spring of 2003, I was visiting my sister, who lives in Hampstead, New Hampshire. She lives in a somewhat wooded subdivision. It was early spring in New England, and the weather had been fairly rainy. I would frequently go outside by myself to smoke cigarettes late at night on the porch after midnight. While I was outside, I would hear larger sticks crack and break on the forest floor near I was sitting, but no leaves rustling. At first, I really didn't think much of it. I'm a seasoned camper and just didn't think it was a big deal. I figured that it was maybe just some kind of animal. This happened night after night. Then I noticed the sounds of something dropping out of the trees and an animal or being of some kind scraping on the bark a bit as it descended. I tried looking for movement, but never saw anything. The floodlights were on every time I was out there and were brightly shining. There was a street light at the end of the long, paved driveway off in the distance. On subsequent nights, I took a flashlight and tried to shine whatever animal it might be, but that was to no avail. Even though everything was brightly lit, I never saw anything at all. I tried this night after night. The sounds were every single evening without fail. I could hear them moving closer and closer to me the longer I was out there. During the day I looked for tracks and marks on trees or other signs and evidence, but never turned up a thing. I picked up sticks and broke a few to see what size of stick that I was hearing. I ascertained that the stick diameter was about 1 inch. I had my 11-year-old nephew go out in the woods to jump on sticks and see if he could break some of them, so I could check the way it sounded from where I was sitting, just trying to judge the distance. He jumped on some, but they were the kind of moist ones that he could only break the smaller ones. He weighed only about 75 or 80 pounds. This alone told me that whatever it was has to weigh more than that. I could break the bigger ones by jumping on them, but I weigh more than 150 pounds. There aren't any animals in that area that are really large and should be able to break that size of stick based on the test that I did. And whatever it was would move in close to me. So I used the nephew to run around and make similar noises to gauge the distance in the daylight when they were at their closest. They were about 20 to 30 feet from me at best. I know there was more than one of them because I could hear one back beside the house and another one was in the front at the end of the driveway. They moved in very close to where I was and I could hear them coming from 2 different directions. They weren't visible to the naked eye at all. I even tried to take some digital photos but saw nothing discernible in all the pictures. And another thing that happened. My sister didn't have any window coverings downstairs. She just loved the view of the trees. And I would sit at night on her computer surfing the web and chatting online near those windows. That's when I would frequently get the feeling that someone was watching me. I would write it off as just my imagination. And then there was the issue of the dogs barking and howling every night, really late like they were hearing something. They were kept in crates in the basement at night, but they would start their howling and wouldn't stop unless someone would go down there and make them stop. They also would look out the windows late in the evening and start barking out behind the house as though something was there. We all thought it was maybe just another animal or whatever, and wrote it off. My brother-in-law decided to keep the dogs upstairs with him at night, to keep them quiet. And one night I was outside, very late after midnight alone. I was up on her porch near the door, and I heard them coming again. The floodlights were on, and I could see well into the trees because there weren't too many smaller bushes in the way. I still saw nothing, but I could hear them. No rustling, only sticks breaking. My sister had a few planters with flowers on them on the lower landing from where I was standing. I was in the really bright light from the floodlights, and it was only about 8 to 10 feet from me. And some of the flowers in the planter draped over the side and hung out away. As I stood there, I watched the plants move to one side and then flop back, as though something had brushed past them. Only nothing was there that I could see at all. There was no other sounds, like footsteps or grinding pebbles. There was also no wind at all. When the flowers swung, they moved a lot, not just a little. Whatever it was would have had to come up the stairs to get me. I just stood there shocked, sort of running over what I had just seen in my mind briefly. I eventually freaked out completely and went back inside quickly, locking the door behind me. Everyone else in the house was asleep, and I looked out the side window, seeing nothing. Another late evening, I was on the computer, and I got that feeling of being watched again. And I looked into the living room from where I was sitting, and I thought I saw shadows on the ceiling as though someone had walked past the lamps in there. I thought maybe I must be getting really tired and told myself it was just my imagination. I decided to take a hot shower to relax before bed, and the bathroom door is right across from the basement door. Now, the basement door was closed when I went into the shower, and everyone was in bed asleep upstairs with the lights off. When I came out of the shower, the basement door was open, and I just closed it, thinking it was a bit strange, but no big deal. Then I go upstairs, and I see my 11-year-old nephew's bedroom light was on, and that's when I got scared. I went up the stairs, and he was in bed, dead asleep, but the light was on really bright. I became afraid for the kids and went and woke up my brother-in-law. He blew me off and just went back to sleep. Just then, my niece woke up to let her dog out, so I asked her to sit up with me for a while. Thank God she was there to sit and keep me company for a little while. What I'm trying to say here is I believe these things were coming in the house somehow, and that's why the dogs barked and howled like they did. I'm not sure how they would have gotten in. Maybe through the walls, maybe the basement outside door, I don't know, but I feel that they're coming in. What are these things? Aliens? Dimensional entities? Were they just watching us? Were they abducting, testing, or maybe even hunting? I have no idea, and it's frightening if you think about it, especially when you realize that on the grass there are no sticks to break, so they are quiet or silent. And there they are right up next to the house. How many other houses do they go into? Then the story goes just a bit further. My sister later divorced and started dating again. Her new boyfriend and I were talking on the phone one evening, and the subject turned to the paranormal. I knew he was an avid New Hampshire hunter, so I asked him if he had ever heard of anything like this, and he said yes. He said that once, back in November of 2003, he and 5 of his friends were out hunting on White Mountain one year, and all of them were, of course, armed. They had set up camp for the night and made a fire, and as they were all sitting around, getting settled for an evening, they started hearing the stick breakers, breaking sticks all around them, but no rustling leaves at all. They never saw anything and couldn't figure out what it was. They did try to shine their flashlights and see what it was, but they never saw anything. Eventually, all 5 got spooked and decided to turn in for the night. And when morning came, they decided to move their camp further up the mountain, closer to where they knew a larger group was set up. They all decided to never talk about the event after that day, and they decided to never go back there again. I was so glad to hear that just someone else had experienced these stick breakers. Now at least I know I'm not nuts. I know there's others out there who's had similar experiences, so please step up and share. I feel that this needs to be brought to the public's attention and put on record. I'll be trying to establish whether these things are still out there or not. Just in case they are, I would like someone to go there and use thermal photography or IR to see maybe if these things can somehow be filmed, photographed, or recorded. I personally don't have the funds to buy the equipment necessary to do it myself, although I'd love to. I just need to find someone in the area who might be willing to go out there and shoot some film, bring their equipment, and check it out. Thanks for taking the time to read this. Signed, Samuel. Hey TB, back in 2012, 2 friends and I, we'll call them D and J, went to Look Rock. It's a concrete observation tower at the top of Chiloe Mountain in Blount County, Tennessee. To get up to the tower, you park in a small pull-off and walk a paved trail half a mile up the mountain. Now, I've been to this tower many times, and there's usually some kind of energy in the air. You can't really see it, but you sure can feel it. It's like the woods themselves have acquired sentience, and they're just barely tolerating your presence. Well, anyway, this particular trip was eerily quiet. Typically in those woods, you can hear sounds, cicadas, wind rustling in the trees, and even the occasional animal, but this particular night was silent. Going back to my simile, it's like the sentient woods were terrified of something, maybe paralyzed with fear. Now, the trip up the mountain itself was uneventful. Apart from the general air of the creepiness, we went up to the tower and just sat there, talking for a few hours. Then finally, around 3 a.m. or so, we decided it was time to wrap it up, and we began the trip back down. At the base of the tower, there were a couple of flattish boulders, about 6 feet or so in diameter, placed there as decoration. Now, what I saw on one boulder was the start of a terrifying night. No one else in my group noticed it, but squatting on the boulder was a solid black form, about 4 to 5 feet tall, with these deeply glowing red eyes. It sat there and stared at us for a second, before vanishing into thin air. Now, assuming my eyes were just messing with me, I reluctantly carried on past those boulders. The feeling of uneasiness followed us up until about the halfway point. Now, in this particular trail, there's a point where it turns 90 degrees to the right when going back down. The trail you're walking on continues forward, but it's just an ATV access for the rangers. This is the Smoky Mountains National Park, after all. About 20 feet or so before that turn, I noticed an extra pair of footsteps. There were only 3 of us, but 4 sets of footsteps. I stopped, I looked, and right behind Jay was a 7-foot-tall heat distortion, like when you look over a flaming grill on a summer day. And this thing was human-shaped. Just like the form on the boulder, after looking at it for a few seconds, it vanished. Well, at this point, we double-timed it back to the car. They hadn't seen it, but they felt it. Halfway down the trail, there's a spot where one tree has fallen into the split trunk of another tree, so it forms kind of a triangle against the ground. There, at the top of that triangle, the same crouched black form with those deep red eyes. And again it vanished after looking at it. We made it back down to the truck, everything in our minds screaming for us to run. And we hauled butt down to Foothills Parkway until we made it back to the highway. From that point on, the trip was uneventful. We dropped Jay off at his house and proceeded to Dee's house, about 15 minutes away. Just as I was pulling out of Dee's driveway, his phone rang. He answered it, suddenly turned pale, and flagged me down. Something had happened at Jay's house. So we booked it back to Jay's, where we found every light in his house on. We went in and found him in bed, with a Bible in one hand and a .45 caliber pistol in the other. Jay's bedroom faces a street light. Also in his room he has a nightlight, a clock, and a stereo, all of which keep his room fairly well lit. He went to bed, and then suddenly the room had gone dark. He could still see the street light, the clock, the stereo, etc., and they were still lit, but they cast no glow into the room. He said he couldn't even see his hand in front of his face. He went on to say that something had put its hand on his throat and growled in his ear before leaving. By the time we got there, it had already left. Just to be sure, we lined the doors and windows with salt. It seems I had read somewhere that salt would keep bad stuff away. Now, we never saw or heard from this thing again, and to this day I have no idea what it was. We've been back to that tower several times since, but it's never been the same. The woods have always seemed quiet and frightening. Signed, Trent. Dear Tattooed Biker, this happened while I was on a 10-mile hike on Christmas Day through southeastern New Mexico, a region that I'd never visited. After finding a safe route down into a river valley, I began to have a severe allergic reaction to a plant that was down there that I had never been exposed to before. I immediately popped some Benadryl that I had in my pack, and we quickly began to climb back out of that valley. In case I began to go into anaphylactic shock, I wanted to be somewhere that medical personnel could reach me easily. My throat was nearly completely swollen by the time we reached the precipice, and I was nearly passing out from lack of oxygen in the strenuous climb out of the valley. That's when suddenly a falcon fluttered onto a branch, no more than just 10 feet from us. We had heard it coming because, well, it surprisingly had a jingling bell around its neck. We paid it little mind and started hiking to the trailhead. The problem is that I'd been the one keeping track of the route that we came in on, and in my daze I'd taken a wrong turn. It was beginning to feel like I had little time to make that kind of mistake, as my throat was beginning to close. As that began to dawn on me, this falcon flies right back up to us and flaps its wings and hops around on a branch nearby. I don't know why, but my brain told me to follow that falcon. As soon as we did, it fluttered from tree to tree and acted distressed if we were lingering for too long. Long story short, this falcon brought us right back to our car very quickly and then flew off immediately after. My friend drove me to the clinic and got there just in time to receive epinephrine and revive me. Now, it may not sound as wild over this email, but that falcon had to have been someone's pet. But how did it know to find distressed hikers and help them? Honestly, it warms my heart. Thank you, falcon, or whatever you are, or whoever sent you. And thank you, biker, for reading this. Signed, Bobby. And there it is. All the real reports about cryptid creatures and true stories of unexplained encounters that I have for you tonight. So, what did you think about these? As always, I'm anxious to read your thoughts and theories down in the comments below, but please, keep it respectful to the witnesses. And if you have an unexplained encounter that you want to share, just send it to the email address in the description and, well, your story may just wind up in a future video. Anyways, thanks for taking this strange ride with me tonight. I really appreciate you. And until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, stay safe, and I'll be seeing you on down the road a ways. Biker out.